She was hired to pretend but ended up belonging a stranger's place at the table. With a stranger. Rain slicked the pavement as Nathan Brooks pulled his sleek silver car into the near-empty parking lot of a 24-hour diner on the edge of the city. It wasn't the kind of place he usually visited, but something about tonight called for greasy coffee and silence. The weight of an emotionally charged phone call with his mother hung heavy on his shoulders. "I just want to see you happy, Nathan." Her voice had quivered through the line. "Your father and I worry. You're 36, successful, but alone." He had no reply to that. Because she was right, the success, the polished suits, the clean-cut reputation, none of it filled the silence in his penthouse apartment. None of it warmed the bed or the aching space behind his ribcage. Nathan grabbed a booth near the window, nodding politely at the weary-eyed waitress who offered him coffee. He barely sipped it. Instead, he stared out into the misty dark, watching the world blur. That's when he saw her. She stood beneath the buzzing flicker of the neon open sign, long auburn hair tucked under a knitted hat, a worn denim jacket 2 sizes too big, mud-caked boots, and a backpack that had clearly seen better days. She looked barely 20, but her posture, guarded and tired, belonged to someone who'd lived far longer. She hesitated before entering the diner, scanning the room quickly. Her eyes met his for a second, just long enough for him to see the storm behind them. She sat 2 booths away, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of water. No order, no food. Nathan watched as the waitress approached her, speaking gently. The girl shook her head. Her stomach growled so loudly that Nathan heard it. She blushed, then turned toward the window. He surprised himself by standing up and walking over. "Excuse me," he said, his voice soft, not wanting to spook her. "You look like you haven't eaten. Would you let me buy you a meal?" She looked up, eyes wary. "Why? Because I can, and because you shouldn't have to go hungry." A long pause, then, "Only if I get to pick what I want." He smiled. "Of course." They shared a booth. Her name was Lena Carter. She'd been couch surfing for months since leaving home. Her voice was clear, tinged with sarcasm, but articulate. She had once studied art, dropped out due to complications, family safety, money life. She didn't elaborate and he didn't push. "So what about you, Mr. Suit? Why are you buying burgers for girls who live out of backpacks?" He chuckled. "Tonight I was just supposed to have coffee and wallow in my own problems, but maybe I needed to talk to someone who sees the world without all the polish." "Ma, well," she said, mouth full of fries, "you picked the right dumpster fire." They spoke for over an hour. She was quick-witted, blunt, and unexpectedly funny. When she went to the restroom, Nathan leaned back and something odd settled in his chest. A thought. A crazy, ridiculous thought. But one he couldn't shake. When she returned, he asked, "How spontaneous are you, Lena?" She narrowed her eyes. "Why?" "My mother is coming into town this weekend. She's desperate to see me settled. I told her I had someone special. It was a lie. I panicked, but now I need someone to play the part. Just for a few days, it would mean the world to her." Lena blinked. "You want me to pretend to be your fiancé?" "Yes. You'll stay in the guest cottage, be introduced as my partner. Join us for dinner. I'll pay you well enough to help you get started somewhere safe." She stared at him. "That's insane." "Probably. Why me?" "Because you're honest. Because I think you're smart enough to pull it off. And because you need a break as much as I do." Silence stretched, then she sighed. "Do I get to pick my wardrobe?" He grinned. "We'll go shopping tomorrow." And just like that, the deal was made. 2 strangers bound by desperation and loneliness entering into a fake engagement with very real consequences neither of them could predict. Outside, the rain had stopped, but something else had begun. The perfect lie. Nathan was efficient, methodical, and used to strategizing for multi-million-dollar contracts, but orchestrating a fake relationship, that was an entirely different playing field. They sat across from each other in his sunlit apartment. Lena, freshly showered and wearing one of his sister's old blouses, looked almost like she belonged there. Her hair was still slightly damp, framing her face in soft waves. Nathan had to remind himself this wasn't real. "Let's go over the basics," he said, clicking open a shared document on his laptop. "We met where Lena tilted her head at a bookstore. Classic, romantic, less creepy than you know." "Craigslist," he smiled. "A bookstore it is. What were we doing there?" "I was looking for old poetry books," she said. "You thought I was shoplifting." He laughed, for real this time. "A misunderstanding, that's perfect." And from there, what coffee dates, walks in the park. Make it believable but not too cliché. Maybe we bonded over our dislike for loud restaurants. Nathan nodded and jotted everything down. "Our anniversary is 6 months ago, first." I love you came after 3. You moved into my guest room last month. He glanced up. You're allergic to cats. You hate olives and you once sang karaoke at a work party to Whitney Houston. I did not agree to the karaoke story, Lena said, grinning. But it makes you endearing, he said, eyes twinkling. The conversation flowed surprisingly naturally for someone who had lived on the streets just weeks ago. Lena had a sharp mind, a quick wit, and a surprising ability to roleplay. She'd once volunteered at a community theater. As a teenager, she explained. Never acted but always watched from backstage. Over the next few days, they rehearsed their story with precision. Nathan showed Lena how to work the espresso machine in the kitchen. She learned how he took his coffee. Black, no sugar. He memorized how she tucked her hair behind her left ear when she was nervous, how she hummed under her breath when cleaning. They established boundaries too. No touching unless it made sense, no sleeping in the same room, no sharing real personal secrets to avoid confusion, Nathan said. But reality and pretense began to blur quickly. One evening, as they stood side by side preparing dinners, Lena chopping onions with surprising skill, and Nathan trying not to overcook the pasta, there was an easy rhythm to their partnership that didn't feel fake at all. This is the most I've laughed while cooking, Nathan said, as Lena made him taste test the sauce with dramatic flair. She looked over at him. That's kind of sad. But I'll take it as a compliment, he smiled. You're good at this. Faking it. No, he said a little more quietly. Fitting in. There was a pause. Lena lowered her eyes. Don't say that unless you mean it. I do, he replied before changing the subject. The day his parents were due to arrive, Lena stood in front of the mirror wearing a soft lavender dress Nathan had bought for her. You didn't have to spend money on clothes for me, she said, as she turned to look at him. You're going to be my fiancé, he said, adjusting his cufflinks. People notice things like that, right? All for show, she said, but her voice had a note of something else. Disappointment. The doorbell rang. Lena jumped slightly. Nathan looked at her. You ready? Oh, as I'll ever be, Nathan's mother. Margaret was a force of nature, sharp eyes, warm smile, but nothing got past her. His father, Roger, was quieter, observant, kind. The moment Margaret laid eyes on Lena, her brows lifted in pleasant surprise. Well, now who's this lovely creature? Nathan cleared his throat. Mom, Dad, this is Lena. My fiancé. Margaret's eyes widened. Fiancé, Roger chuckled. You always were full of surprises. Son, Marv didn't miss a beat. She stepped forward and took Lena's hand in both of hers. You're beautiful, dear. I had no idea. And when is the wedding? We're thinking next spring, Lena said with practiced ease. Something small, intimate. Margaret raised an eyebrow at Nathan. I'd better not find out through a wedding invitation again. As the evening unfolded, Lena dazzled. She laughed at Nathan's father's jokes, shared stories, made up of course about their first date, and asked thoughtful questions about the family's history. Margaret, for her part, was visibly impressed. When the night ended and they were finally alone, Nathan closed the apartment door and turned to Lena. You were incredible. She looked at him, tired but glowing. I was terrified. You didn't look it. There was a silence between them, something fragile floating in the air. I think your mom likes me, she said softly. I think she might like you better than she likes me. They both laughed, and then without thinking, Nathan reached up and brushed a strand of hair from Lena's face. The touch lingered just a moment too long. Boundaries, Lena whispered, but her voice was trembling. I know, he replied, but neither of them stepped away. The lines were blurring fast, and neither of them seemed ready to stop it. A dance with doubt. The morning after dinner with Nathan's parents, Lena woke up to sunlight streaming through the tall windows of the guest room. She lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the espresso machine from the kitchen. Nathan, as always, was already up. For a moment it felt real, like she actually belonged here. Then and memory of last night came rushing in. The laughter, the wine, Nathan's fingers brushing her cheek. Her hand instinctively reached up to where he'd touched her. It had meant something, but it wasn't supposed to. She got dressed quietly and stepped into the kitchen. Nathan was leaning over the counter reading an email, coffee in one hand. He glanced up when he heard her. Morning. There was an awkward pause. For the first time, she didn't know what to say to him. I made you coffee, he offered. And I thought we could go into the city today. Walk around. Mom wants to meet us for lunch. Lena blinked. Lunch again, he shrugged. She says she wants to get to know you better. She loved you. Lena forced a smile. Great, just what I needed. An interrogation round 2. You'll be fine, Nathan said, studying her carefully. You were flawless last night. But that's just it, she said, dropping her eyes. It was supposed to be an act, but it didn't feel like it. Nathan didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked out the window, coffee halfway to his lips. You're not the only one who felt that, he finally said. She glanced up, surprised. But we both know the rules, he added. Right? Rules. They drove in silence. Downtown, the streets were alive with weekend bustle, families strolling, musicians playing at corners, dogs tugging leashes with excitement. Lena kept her eyes on the city, pretending she wasn't bothered by the silence between them. Margaret greeted them at the restaurant with a hug and a glint in her eye. I hope you two aren't hiding anything juicy from me. We're very boring, Lena said with a smile. Margaret laughed. That's what they all say. As they settled into a table on the patio, Lena noticed a woman approaching from across the street, elegant, poised, striking in a navy blue blazer and heels that clicked confidently on the pavement. Nathan's jaw tightened. Margaret looked up and sighed. Oh, wonderful. The woman stopped right at their table. Nathan, she said coolly. Didn't expect to see you here. Lena blinked. Nathan stood stiffly. Ava. Ava. Lena recognized the name from one of Nathan's few casual mentions, the AX. Ava's eyes slid to Lena. And who might this be? Margaret jumped in. This is Lena, Nathan's fiancée. Ava's eyebrows rose slightly, but her smile didn't waver. Fiancé. How? Fast. Lena kept her composure. It's a recent development. Ava nodded slowly, clearly enjoying the tension. Well, congratulations. Nathan always a surprise. And with that, she walked away. Silence stretched for a long beat. Well, Margaret said, folding her napkin. I'll be honest, I never liked her. She was all appearances and ambition, no heart. Lena looked at Nathan, who was still watching Ava disappear into the crowd. There was a look on his face she couldn't read. I'm sorry, Lena said softly. He shook his head. Don't be. That part of my life is over. But as they drove home, she noticed how quiet he was, how tightly he gripped the steering wheel. He didn't look at her once. Back at the apartment, Lena retreated to her guest room, closing the door behind her. She sat on the bed, hands clenched in her lap, trying to make sense of what she felt. Jealousy. No, she had no right to be jealous. This wasn't real. But it was getting harder to remember that. Later that evening, she found herself sketching again, something she hadn't done in weeks. The lines came naturally, almost instinctively. She sketched Nathan's hands resting on the steering wheel, tension in every tendon, then his face shadowed with something unspoken. There was a knock. She looked up. Nathan stood in the doorway, looking worn. He stepped inside and held out a glass of wine. I thought you might need this. Thanks. He glanced at the sketchbook beside her. You've been drawing again, helps me process. He nodded. About Ava. You don't owe me an explanation, Lena said. Maybe I do, he replied quietly. We were together for 4 years. We almost got married, then she left. Said I was too closed off, that I didn't let people in. And were you? Didn't answer right away. Yeah, probably. I didn't know how to let someone close until he stopped, until she asked. He met her eyes until her breath caught. Then he shook his head. But this isn't real. Right? Lena wanted to lie, wanted to nod and say yes, it's just a game, but her heart wasn't cooperating. Instead, she said, I don't know what this is anymore. They stood in that stillness, the air between them thick with everything unspoken. Finally, Nathan stepped closer, took the glass from her hand and set it down on the table. Then he reached for her hand. I want to know what it could be. Lena, no lies, no pretending. She looked down at their fingers intertwined. It felt too good, too safe, too dangerous, she whispered. But what if we're just fooling ourselves? Then we stop pretending, he said, and see what's left. Unraveling the facade. Lena knew how to handle herself in the kitchen, and in the quiet hours of the morning, she put that skill to work. She was up before sunrise, determined to impress not just by acting as Ethan's fiancée, but by showing how useful she could be. While Ethan was still asleep, Lena slipped out of the guest room and into the expansive kitchen of the Lancaster estate. She found her way around like she'd been there for years, moving through the cabinets and drawers with an intuitive grace. She whipped up a breakfast of fluffy scrambled eggs with chives from the garden, buttered sourdough toast, caramelized bacon, and brewed a French press full of strong black coffee. The scent wafted through the house like a gentle wake-up call, and soon Ethan's mother Celeste appeared in the kitchen doorway, her silk robe drawn tight around her waist. Well, someone's up early, Celeste remarked. Surprised, Lean turned, wiping her hands on a linen towel. I thought I'd get a head start on the day you work so hard, hosting everyone I wanted to contribute. Celeste tilted her head slightly, studying her. Most girls your age would sleep in and expect to be served. Lena offered a quiet smile. I'm not most girls. Something in Celeste's expression softened. She stepped further into the kitchen and took a seat at the island where Lena had already laid out 2 sets of plates and utensils. They ate together, and the conversation meandered from food to travel and then to family. Lena kept her answers honest but vague, never claiming more than she could explain. She spoke warmly of Ethan and their journey together, how they balanced each other, and how he'd taught her to believe in herself. The words came easily, not because they were rehearsed, but because she found some part of them to be true. As they finished breakfast, Ethan appeared hair tousled and eyes sleepy. He looked at the table, then at Lena, and then at his mother, all sharing a moment that could have been ripped from a real memory. Not an act. You made this, Ethan asked Lena, taking a seat next to her. She did. Celeste answered before Lena could, her voice carrying a note of approval. And it was lovely. Ethan gave Lena a look of astonishment mixed with quiet gratitude. This was going better than he ever could have hoped. Later that day, the family headed out to a local charity event, a garden fundraiser Celeste chaired every spring. Lena accompanied Ethan, and to everyone's surprise, she blended right in. She chatted with board members, complimented the floral arrangements, and even helped organize a raffle drawing. Her natural empathy and curiosity made her charming to others. When asked how they met, she and Ethan spun the same story they had practiced, but their chemistry made it believable. So believable, in fact, that Celeste's sister Margot pulled her aside. You know, when Ethan told me he was bringing someone serious, I expected someone, well, different. Different, how Lena asked carefully. High maintenance, the kind of woman who sees Ethan as a prize, but you... Margot paused, searching for the word. You look at him like you've already won the prize. It's refreshing. Lena didn't know what to say. She wasn't sure if Margot meant it as a compliment, but it sat in her chest like something soft and warm. Back at the estate that evening, Lena retreated to the room Ethan had given her, changed into something comfortable, and sat by the window. Presto, the old Labrador mix who'd taken to her since her arrival, lay at her feet. She sketched in her notebook faces from the garden party, textures of hydrangeas, a smile Ethan had given her when no one else was looking. Ethan knocked before entering, holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. Thought you might want some, he said. She accepted the drink with a nod. Thanks. Your mom didn't poison it, did she? He laughed. Actually, she told me she liked you a lot. I'm not sure if I should be thrilled or terrified. They sat in silence for a few minutes before Lena asked, How's your dad doing? Ethan's smile faded, tired. The medication helps, but it's not a cure. He's realistic about it. That's why this week matters. You mean pretending to be in love? Lena teased gently. Ethan turned toward her. No, I mean giving him peace. He just wants to see me happy before... His voice trailed off and Lena reached over, placing a hand over his. You're a good son, Ethan. He looked at her, then something unreadable in his eyes. I hope so. The next morning, Stephanie, a family friend and longtime housekeeper, cornered Lena while folding linens. I've seen a lot of women come through this house, Stephanie began, and I can tell when someone's faking it. Lena stiffened. Is that what you think I'm doing? Stephanie studied her for a long moment. No, I think you're scared, but not of pretending, of what happens if it becomes real. Lena swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Just be careful with the hearts, child. Stephanie said, her voice softening, yours and his. As the days passed, Lena began feeling less like a guest and more like someone who belonged. But that growing comfort only made the weight of the lie heavier. At a dinner party Ethan's family hosted that weekend, Lena wore a navy blue dress that Celeste had insisted on buying for her. She felt beautiful in it, but also exposed, like she was stepping into shoes too big to fill. That evening, as laughter echoed around the dining room and wine glasses clinked, someone brought up marriage. So when's the big day? Ethan's cousin asked, raising a glass. All eyes turned to Ethan and Lena. They looked at each other, unsure who would speak first. Ethan cleared his throat. Nothing's set in stone yet. We're taking our time, Lena added quickly, but it's definitely in the cards. Celeste, seated across the table, raised an eyebrow, amused, not angry. Later that night, as Lynn helped clear his plate, Celeste approached. You know, dear, she said softly, the best lies are the ones that start with a little truth, but they never stay little. Lena's hand stilled. Celeste smiled, patting her shoulder. Just something to think about. And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving Lena standing in the dim light of the dining room, caught between the roles she played and the feelings that were starting to feel too real, between truth and tenderness. Lena woke up before dawn, the house still wrapped in silence. Outside her window, the first hints of sunlight painted the edges of the trees in the garden, golden and gentle. She sat up in bed, still in the pale silk pajama Celeste had given her, and pressed her hand to her heart. It beat with a quiet unease, the kind that grows in the space between what is true and what is almost true. This wasn't just another day pretending to be someone she wasn't. Something was shifting, and Lena could feel it. The evening before, Celeste's words had haunted her. The best lies are the ones that start with a little truth, but they never stay little. That had struck too close, too real. And Lena wasn't sure anymore what parts of this were still a lie. She dressed quietly and tiptoed to the kitchen. The housekeeper, Stephanie, was already there, preparing trays for breakfast. Stephanie greeted her with a quiet nod and a steaming mug of coffee. A silent truce of sorts after their last conversation. "Morning," Lena said softly. Stephanie studied her for a moment before replying. "Morning, you look like someone with a lot on her mind." Lena smiled faintly. "Too much. Want to help me roll out some dough? Kneading can be good therapy." They worked in silence for a while, the rhythm of the rolling pins oddly comforting. Then Stephanie spoke again. "I meant what I said. Be careful, not because I don't think you're good for him, but because you just might be." Lena looked up. "That's what scares me." Later that day, Ethan took Lena into town. Officially, it was to help pick out something for his father's upcoming birthday. But Lena suspected Ethan had other reasons. He'd grown quieter over the last couple of days, more thoughtful, like he was holding something back. The small coastal town was charming, full of artisan shops, local cafes and cobblestone streets lined with flowering dogwoods. Lena marveled at the hand-carved furniture in one shop, traced her fingers over delicate ceramics in another. When they passed a vintage bookstore, Ethan stopped her. "Come in here," he said. "There's something I want to show you." The store smelled like old pages and lavender. Ethan led her to a back corner, where a dusty shelf bore the words, "Rare Finds." He pulled out a small leather-bound journal, its spine worn with age. "This belonged to my grandfather," he said. The owner of the shop found it in a donation box and recognized the name. "Called my mother last year." Lena opened the book, her breath catching as she read the first page. "To the one who dares to love deeply even when the world says not to." "He wrote poetry?" she asked, stunned apparently. Ethan said with a soft smile, "He wasn't just a farmer, he was a romantic." Lena turned the pages slowly, her eyes scanning delicate verses about love, longing, and the fear of being forgotten. One poem in particular stopped her. "I would rather live a moment in truth than a lifetime in silence." She looked up at Ethan. "Why are you showing me this? Because I think we've been lying long enough." Lena's heart stuttered. "Ethan." He shook his head. "Just listen. When this started, it was just a favor, a cover. I didn't expect anything more. But then I started looking forward to talking with you, to hearing your thoughts, watching you sketch, seeing you smile when my dad cracks his ridiculous jokes. I don't know when it changed Lena, but it did." Lena lowered the book, hands trembling. "I feel it too. But it's complicated." "It doesn't have to be," he said. "We don't owe anyone the full story yet, but we owe ourselves the truth." She didn't answer, couldn't, not yet, but her eyes said enough. That night, Ethan's father, Ray, had a hard time sleeping. Lena heard him coughing through the hallway and gently knocked on his door. Celeste was sitting at his bedside, rubbing his back. "You should rest," Lena offered. "Let me sit with him a while." Celeste hesitated, then nodded. "I'll be just down the hall." Ray smiled as Lena poured him a glass of water and sat beside him. "You don't have to babysit an old man," he said. "I don't mind. I like your stories." Ray chuckled. "You know, I see the way you look at Ethan. It's the same way his mother used to look at me when we were kids, like I was her whole world." Lena swallowed hard. "You think he knows?" "Oh, he knows. Boys pretend not to notice, but deep down they feel it." Ray grew quiet, eyes drifting toward the ceiling. "Promise me something," he said. "Don't let him drift. He's smart and strong, but he can lose sight of what matters." Lena reached out gently, held his hand. "I promise." The next morning, the house was abuzz with quiet tension. Celeste had arranged a brunch with extended family. It was supposed to be casual, but there was nothing casual about the way chairs were being placed or how Stephanie ironed scented napkins twice. Lena dressed carefully, a pale floral dress, modest but elegant. Ethan met her at the top of the stairs, looking at her like he didn't quite know what to say. "You look..." He stopped. "You look like someone I'm not pretending with." She smiled. "Good, because I'm not pretending anymore." Brunch was a flurry of introductions, laughter, and clinking glasses. Lena charmed the cousins, held a baby without flinching, and even laughed at Ethan's uncle's off-color jokes. But in the middle of it all, Celeste's sharp eyes never left her. After everyone had eaten, Celeste asked Lena to join her for a walk in the garden. The air was thick with honeysuckle, and the winding paths through the hedges felt like a maze. Fitting, Lena thought. "You're a very convincing actress," Celeste began. Lena stiffened. "Is that what you think this is still?" Celeste stopped walking and turned. "I think it started that way, but I also think you're struggling now, and that's because it stopped being fake for you." Lena looked down at her hands. "I didn't plan for this. I didn't think someone like me could what? Could fit in here, could be good enough." Celeste's expression softened, her voice lower now. "Lena, do you know why I let you stay? Why I didn't call you out from the beginning?" Lena shook her head. "Because you brought Ethan back to me. The real Ethan, the one who used to believe in love and loyalty. That's not something I can ignore," but she added, her voice tightening. "Don't break his heart or yours." Lena blinked against the sudden sting in her eyes. "I won't," she whispered. Celeste nodded. "Then let's stop pretending. The next family dinner, it'll be your story to tell." Lena walked back to the house with her heart heavy and light all at once. The lie had grown twisted into something unrecognizable, but in that garden she had found a truth worth chasing, and for the first time in years she believed that maybe, just maybe, she deserved it. Cracks in the glass. Lena awoke in the early hours, the faint light of dawn seeping through the curtains. The soft ticking of the wall clock echoed in the stillness, accompanied only by the gentle whir of the ceiling fan. Yet her heart beat with a familiar ache, an unshakable tension that whispered something is about to change. Downstairs, the house was already stirring. Stephanie moved with practiced grace, setting out linens for brunch. Lena made her way to the kitchen, hoping for a quiet moment before the day's expectations unfolded. "Didn't sleep?" Stephanie asked, handing her a cup of black coffee. Lena shook her head. "Too much noise up here," she said, tapping her temple. They stood in silence, sipping slowly. Then Stephanie, always sharper than she let on, said, "You know, sometimes the past shows up just when the future starts to look possible." Lena stared at her. "Why do I feel like you know more than you let on?" Stephanie gave a half shrug, half smile. "Because I've lived a little, and I know that look in your eyes." That afternoon, while Celeste made a call in the study, Lena passed by and froze. Through the half-open door, she heard a name. Matthew Monroe. The name crashed into her chest like a stone thrown into glass. Cracks spidered through her calm. She stepped back, breath caught, heart racing. She barely remembered the rest of the day, only that she kept looking over her shoulder, that night unable to sleep. Lena wandered outside barefoot, letting the cold tile cool her burning thoughts. She thought about the man who had tried to ruin her life, about the false accusations, the whispers at school, the aunt who turned cold overnight. The next morning, the bell rang. Stephanie answered it, then called out, "Lena, someone's here for you." A man stood on the porch, early 40s suit, slightly wrinkled but polite. "Ms. Monroe," he asked. "I'm Lena. I'm Michael Curtis, investigative reporter. I'm following up on a case from 3 years ago, the Monroe Foundation scandal. You may not know, but your name was mentioned in some of the original files." Lena went pale. "I'm not here to accuse you," he added quickly, "but I'd like to hear your side if you're willing." Behind him, Celeste had come to the doorway. She glanced at Lena, eyes unreadable. The conversation that followed was long, emotional, and at times painful. Lena explained how she had worked part-time in the foundation's office, how she'd discovered the embezzlement, how she'd gone to a professor who had leaked her name. She hadn't stolen anything, but once the heat came down, no one defended her. Her name was tarnished by association. "Why didn't you go public then?" Celeste asked later. "Because I didn't have anyone to believe me," Lena said. "And I didn't want to be a victim. I just wanted to survive." That evening, Lena began packing. She didn't tell Ethan. She wrote a letter instead. It read, "To the Thompsons. Thank you for giving me something. I thought I'd never have a sense of belonging, but I came here with a lie, and now the truth is out. I care about Ethan more than I expected. That's why I have to go. I won't let the past destroy your trust in me. Please don't come looking. I'll be okay." She placed the letter on her bed and quietly slipped out with a small bag. But at the gate, Celeste was waiting. "You're not running again," she said firmly. "Not this time. I can't stay," Lena whispered. "You heard what they think of me." Celeste stepped forward, her voice softer. "I also heard what you've been through, and I believe you. More than that, I admire you. If my son loves you, it's because you've earned it. Don't you dare walk away from that." Lena's eyes welled. Celeste reached out and hugged her, the first real motherly hug Lena could remember in years. Let's go back together. At brunch the next day, tension buzzed beneath the cheerful chatter. Someone, a cousin loud and brash, asked, "So how did you two meet exactly? Was it at one of Ethan's charity events?" There was a beat of silence. Lena opened her mouth, but Celeste spoke first. They met when Ethan offered her a second chance at life and she offered him one in return. Whispers rose. Another aunt leaned over. "Isn't she that girl who was involved in Celeste?" Stood calm but commanding. "If anyone wants to bring gossip to my table, feel free to leave it at the door. This young woman stood by my son's side while his father was in the hospital, while we worried every night. She's shown more integrity than most people I know." She looked at Lena, then back at the crowd. "And I'll say this, once in this family, we lift each other, not tear each other down." Ethan reached under the table and took Lena's hand. She gripped it like a lifeline. That evening, Lena sat at her desk in the cottage. She had sketched Ethan dozens of times, but now she tried something new. She drew a family portrait. Ray in his old sweater, Celeste holding a teacup, Ethan leaning slightly toward Lena, and Lena herself just a little apart from them. Ethan walked in and saw it. "Why so far away?" he asked. Lena looked at the drawing. "Because I don't know if I belong yet." Ethan picked up the pencil and gently closed the gap between her figure and theirs. "Now you do." That night, as they stood on the porch, Ethan kissed her forehead. "No more pretending," he asked. "No more," Lena said, resting her head on his shoulder. The cracks in the glass had let the light in, and Lena, after all she'd lost, was finally letting herself believe in love again. Fractures and flames. Lena thought she had survived the storm. But the calm was only the eye, and the storm still had more to give. It began with a headline splashed across a local gossip column that had somehow made its way to national news. From scandal to society, the mysterious rise of Lena Monroe. The article wasn't just cruel, it was thorough. It dredged up the Monroe Foundation scandal, framed Lena as a central figure, and implied her relationship with Ethan Thompson was nothing more than a calculated move. There were photos, grainy shots from her past, an old employee badge, and a blurred image of her leaving the Thompson estate. That morning, Lena sat frozen at the breakfast table as Celeste laid the paper in front of her. No words, just a firm look. Ethan, groggy from a restless night, stood behind them both, reading over Celeste's shoulder. He said nothing. The silence was a blade. "I didn't know this was coming," Lena said softly. Celeste looked at her. "You should have prepared us." "I tried," she whispered. "I thought it was over." Ethan turned away. "I need to think." By the end of the day, the entire extended family had caught wind of the story. Ethan's phone buzzed with messages, his inbox filled with questions and judgment. Some of his investors were quietly reaching out, concerned. In the study, Ethan sat alone with the article. He stared at Lena's face in the photo. Was it love, or had he been fooled? When Lena entered the room, he didn't turn. "I want to believe you," he said, "but I don't know what's real anymore. I never lied to you about who I am. I just didn't know how to explain all of it." "Then maybe," Ethan said quietly, "we need space to figure this out." Lena's breath caught. "Are you breaking up with me?" "No, I'm just stepping back for both our sakes." And that was it. No dramatic fight, no slammed doors, just an empty space where trust used to live. Lena moved back into the guest cottage. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument could have been. Celeste, watching it unfold, made a decision. She had fought too hard for her family's name to let truth be buried under tabloid ink, and she had come to respect Lena. Her resilience, her honesty. So she made calls. She found an old contact, a professor from Lena's university, who remembered her coming forward with concerns about the foundation's bookkeeping. Another lead brought her to a retired lawyer who had quietly tried to build a case around the foundation's financial abuse but had been shut down when Lena's name was leaked bit by bit. Celeste gathered pieces of truth, real witnesses, real records. She even tracked down an investigative journalist who had once tried to publish a piece in Lena's defense but had been silenced due to pressure from powerful donors. With Celeste's connections, she reopened that conversation. Meanwhile, Ethan drowned in doubt. He avoided his parents, avoided Lena. He wandered the city, revisited the places where he'd first realized he loved her, and everywhere he went, memories followed. Lena's laugh, her stubbornness, her unwavering kindness. He even returned to the shelter where she first found refuge, speaking with people who remembered her, volunteering there long before she ever met him. One elderly man who had once shared a bunk beside her simply said, "She never took more than she gave." At night, he stared at the portrait she had drawn of his family. Her self-portrait still stood slightly apart, and he hated himself for letting her feel that way. Then came Celeste's moment. She organized a private press statement, carefully orchestrated. She invited key reporters, offered coffee and facts. She didn't defend Lena with sentiment. She laid down evidence, dates, testimony, timelines. She showed that Lena had tried to do the right thing and that the ones who had silenced her had now vanished into the shadows. The next day, a new article appeared, The Truth Behind the Monroe Scandal, Lena's Story Finally Heard. Ethan saw it at the cafe. He read every word. And when he reached the quote from Celeste, "She didn't come into our lives to deceive us, she gave us back our son's heart," his hands began to shake. He returned home just as the sun was setting. Lena was on the porch of the cottage. Sketching, she looked up unsure. He sat beside her. "I'm sorry," Ethan said. "I failed you." She looked at him quiet. "You didn't trust me. I know, but you still deserve to hear it. I'm sorry." They sat in silence. Finally, she said, "You left when I needed you." "I was scared," Ethan admitted. "But I don't want to be that kind of man. Not with you," Lena exhaled. "You can't fix it all with an apology, I know, but maybe I can start with one, and if you let me, I want to earn it back every day." Lena looked at him, then back down at the sketch in her lap. It wasn't finished. It was of the two of them, but her pencil had paused halfway through his face. She handed it to him. "Then finish this." "Start here." Ethan took the pencil and began to draw. The quiet crusade. Celeste Thompson had spent her entire life protecting the things that mattered. Her family, their name. The quiet dignity passed down through generations of Thompsons. She wasn't someone who took risks lightly, and yet, as she watched Lena retreat into silence after the fallout of the article, something shifted. There was a look in Lena's eyes Celeste couldn't ignore. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't fear. It was the same look she had seen in the mirror years ago when her husband was falsely accused at work, and she had stood alone to clear his name. It was the look of someone tired of being misunderstood and too worn down to keep fighting. Celeste remembered that pain. She didn't trust easily, but she believed in truth. And she had seen enough of Lena, her restraint in conversations, her empathy toward Ethan's father, the quiet way she kept things neat in the guest house, to know that Lena wasn't calculating. She was simply trying to survive with grace. So, Celeste began. She started with the university. A few old friends still worked in administration, and while she couldn't access sealed documents, she found someone who remembered Lena. Professor Donnelly, an ethics instructor, recalled Lena as the quiet student who asked all the right questions. He had been the one she confided in when she noticed irregularities at the Monroe Foundation where she interned. She was scared but determined, he told Celeste. And when they shut her out, she didn't try to make noise, she tried to make it right. Celeste wrote down every name he gave her, every date. She contacted a retired legal associate who once pursued a quiet inquiry into Monroe Foundation's finances until pressure from wealthy board members made the case disappear. The lawyer remembered Lena. She had integrity, he said. Most kids in her position would have walked away. She kept showing up. At night, Celeste sat by the fire with a notebook in her lap, piecing together timelines. She highlighted the months Lena had worked at Monroe, traced the connections between the executives involved. She even called a former employee, now a barista in Oregon, who remembered how Lena had warned her quietly to be careful with sensitive files. She didn't gossip. The woman said she just cared for the first time in a long time. Celeste felt rage and purpose in equal measure, not because of how the world had failed Lena, but because she had failed her too. She had judged her too quickly, too harshly. And worst of all, she hadn't defended her when the headlines hit guilt sharp and cold sat heavy in her chest. But she didn't dwell. She acted. The private press briefing was her idea, a controlled space, no drama, just facts. She handed over testimonies, printed documents, and asked them to listen before they wrote. She spoke clearly, carefully, and without emotion, except when she said one sentence: "This young woman walked into our lives quietly and brought our family back together. She deserves better than the world gave her." After the reporters left, Celeste stood alone in the empty dining room where the briefing had taken place. Her hands trembled slightly, a paper still clutched between them. But her heart, for the first time since the scandal broke, felt steady. She didn't know if it would fix everything, but she knew she had done right by Lena, and that mattered. Echoes in the headlines. The day Celeste's press statement was published, the shift in public tone was immediate and thunderous. News anchors who had once smirked while delivering their scandalous takes on Lena Monroe were now revising their scripts in real-time talk shows, retracted earlier speculations, and several online platforms issued public apologies admitting they had run with half-baked information. One influential journalist tweeted, "We owe Lena Monroe an apology. Her story is one of courage, not cunning." The article, meticulously constructed and supported by undeniable evidence, painted Lena not as a manipulator but as a whistleblower who had been unfairly targeted. Public sentiment began to change, not slowly but in waves. Comment sections that had once been filled with vitriol were now flooded with apologies and support. Strangers defended her, sharing their own stories of being silenced for speaking the truth. Hashtags like #WeStandWithLena and #TruthWins began trending. But for Lena, it wasn't just about headlines. It was about the glances that no longer carried suspicion, the tension that slowly lifted when she entered a room. Back at the Thompson estate, the change was subtle, but undeniable. Ethan noticed it first in his father, Ray, who offered Lena a book on resilience with a note that simply read, "You remind me of the strongest people I've known." Celeste, who had once sat across the breakfast table with veiled caution, now sat beside Lena in the garden, offering advice on how to handle the incoming media requests. "You don't owe anyone your pain," she said. "Only your truth if you choose to share it." Extended family members, once skeptical, began calling Celeste and Ethan with reassurances. Ethan's cousin Emily, a lawyer, offered to represent Lena should any new legal issues arise. Even investors who had kept their distance returned with renewed confidence, some even praising Ethan's judgment in standing by someone of such integrity. Inside the house, the air felt different. Warmer. Ethan, overwhelmed by the weight he had carried, finally allowed himself to breathe. And when Lena returned from a walk one evening, she found him waiting on the steps of the cottage with a blanket and 2 cups of tea. He didn't speak at first, just handed her the mug and waited until she sat beside him. "I saw what they wrote about you today," he said softly. "But none of it surprised me. I think I always knew I just needed to be brave enough to trust my gut." Lena looked at him, her expression unreadable. "So what now?" "Now," Ethan said, his voice steady. "We move forward, and this time we do it together. No secrets, no distance, just us." The press continued to knock to ask for exclusive interviews to dig deeper. But Lena wasn't interested in fame. She gave one final interview, not to a national outlet but to a small nonprofit journal dedicated to whistleblower stories. In it, she spoke not of her relationship, not of the scandal, but of how systems fail good people and how the real cost of integrity is often isolation. It was that article, not the flashy exposés or cable news features, that moved Celeste the most. She printed it and tucked it into the family photo album just behind a snapshot of Lena in the garden smiling. That was the moment Celeste knew Lena wasn't just part of the family, she was part of their legacy. The real proposal. The days that followed were quieter, not the strained silence of before, but the kind that settles after a storm when the world stills just enough for hearts to catch up. Lena found herself breathing more easily. No longer flinching at the ping of a news notification or the sideways glance of a stranger. At the Thompson estate, things had shifted. Ray, who had once eyed Lena with suspicion, now invited her to help him weed the garden, offering gruff commentary on the best time to plant beets. Celeste, more open than ever, started asking Lena's opinion on small household changes. New curtains, a recipe for lemon scones, these were small gestures, but to Lena they felt monumental, and Ethan, he was trying to navigate something he hadn't expected, a second chance. One afternoon, while Lena was sketching on the veranda, Ethan appeared beside her with 2 mugs of tea. He sat without a word, watching the pencil dance across the page. She was drawing presto, curled on a windowsill, sunlight spilling over his golden fur. "You're good," Ethan said. Lena smiled faintly. "You've said that before." "I'll keep saying it," he replied, his voice softer now, "if it helps you believe it." There was a long pause before Ethan spoke again. "You didn't deserve what happened to you, and you didn't deserve the way I doubted you." Lena looked down. "It wasn't just you. I stopped trusting myself a long time ago." Ethan turned toward her, eyes searching hers. "Can we start over? For real this time? No pretending, no contracts, just you and me." Lena didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a long sip of tea, then looked back at her sketch. Finally, she nodded. "Yes, but slow. I've had enough make-believe to last a lifetime." Ethan smiled, a true quiet smile. "Slow sounds perfect." Weeks passed. Spring blossomed fully around the estate. The press had moved on to the next scandal, the next sensational headline. Lena resumed her art classes, now with a scholarship quietly arranged by Celeste. Ethan returned to work with a calmer intensity. No longer chasing legacy, just trying to build something honest. One morning, Lena received an envelope in the mail. It was thick, elegant, and bore the seal of the Investigative Journalism Award Board. She was listed in the byline of the article Celeste had helped publish. Her name, once smeared, was now being honored. Tears welled in her eyes, not because of recognition, but because someone had finally told the truth and the world had listened that night. Ethan cooked dinner, not ordered in, not reheated. He'd taken an online class, watched tutorials, and much to Ray's amusement, nearly set the kitchen ablaze learning to flambe. But he served Lena roasted chicken, garlic, mashed potatoes, and green beans with slivered almonds. He lit candles, played an old jazz record, wore the sweater she once said made him look almost charming. And after dessert, a slightly burnt apple tart. Ethan stood, took her hand, and dropped to one knee. I know we started with a lie, but everything since has been real. You taught me how to feel again, how to listen, how to love without being afraid of the cost. Lena Monroe, will you marry me? Not for the press, not for my parents, but for us. Lena stared, heart thudding. Then she reached into her sketchbook, tore out a drawing she had hidden for weeks, a portrait of Ethan holding her hand under starlight, and handed it to him. Yes, she whispered. Presto, barked. Celeste cheered from the hallway. Ray raised a glass from the den, and somewhere in the back of the house a record skipped, then kept playing. The story, real, flawed, and fiercely beautiful, was just beginning.